with this one. And in the studio now, we have Conservative political commentator Albie Amankona about this, economics commentator Laurie Laird, and we're also joined down the line by the associate editor of the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire. So, Kevin, Liz Truss has got the job. I said who would want the job. She's got the job. And day 2 for her in the job. What did you think of day 1?
Yeah, I could name one other person who wanted it, Rishi Sunak. I'll put in a third, and that's Keir Starmer. There's no shortage of candidates for that job. The big test is today. When we see the colour of the money, the support, it is the biggest single issue facing her. But yesterday, at Prime Minister's Questions, I thought she did pretty well. She's a lousy public speaker, but she is much better in the House of Commons. I thought she played it rather well because she had Conservative MPs. Most of them didn't back her, but they were behind her. Keir Starmer has a problem in the sense that he must be careful not to appear to be bullying a woman, particularly in her first full day in the job. But the big dividing line we came away with from those exchanges was over the windfall tax to fund an energy policy. Both parties are pushing for a cap. Labour would freeze it. She's going to cap it slightly higher. But do you fund that in part with a windfall tax or not? And she's against that. So she could say Labour is tax and spend, but Labour then can say, hang on, Liz Truss and the Conservatives, they're still spend but don't tax.
Well, let me bring in Albie Amankona and all of this, a Conservative commentator. And Albie, of course, there is a windfall tax coming in that Rishi Sunak announced just before this leadership contest. So there is a smaller windfall tax than perhaps Labour would like to see. But you feel that's just about right?
Yes, I think the windfall tax at the level that it is when Rishi Sunak brought it in was the right policy to pursue. The question about this new energy plan, because the situation has deteriorated, is how do we pay for this energy plan? Now, I actually think the dividing lines between Labour and the Conservatives on this are actually quite small. They agree that there needs to be a big package to help families and businesses, a big one, 100 billion, 150 billion, as we were discussing earlier. Bigger than the furlough package. Bigger than the furlough package. I think almost as much as we spend on the NHS each year. How are we going to pay for it? That is the dividing line. Labour wants an extension of the windfall tax. The Conservatives seem to want to add it to the national debt.
Well, Albie, I have an economics commentator in the form of Laurie Laird here. You say, how are we going to pay for it? Is there a dividing line between what the government want, the political ambition, and what the Bank of England feels can happen?
Well, I think you're right, Albie, where there's not much between Labour and the Conservatives. Big gap between the Conservatives and the markets and the Bank of England on the side, because, of course, the Bank of England's going to have to set interest rates depending on what this fiscal policy is. But let's talk first about the borrowing. This is the big question. Can we borrow this much? The markets are not liking this right now. We've seen interest rates, market-based interest rates. And let's look at the 10-year gilt. That's what the UK has to pay to borrow for 10 years. The yield on that has gone to 3% from just under 1% early in the year. That's a massive, massive rise. That said, we're not to the 5, 6, 7% that we've seen in decades past. So I'd argue that we can still borrow at the moment, but it's a risk. It's a massive risk.
So how do we pay it back? Through taxation?
Through taxation over the years. Or if you're Liz Truss, you think that somehow magically I'm going to cut taxes down the road. That's going to spur some kind of growth. If we spur growth, people will pay more taxes. There'll be more in the exchequer. So somehow magically we can pay this all back over the years. It's a bit...
But there is going to be a bit of growth. I understand the economics with the pound falling in value against the dollar because oil and gas is paid in dollars, and therefore that's going to cost us more on that front. Yet it makes our goods more affordable to the rest of the world, doesn't it? Which gives into the Liz Truss theory of everybody's going to get into work and everybody's going to earn revenue for the exchequer.
And we'll be on the sunlit uplands and everything will be fine. You're absolutely right. You've got the mechanism right. If the pound is weaker, the stuff that we send abroad becomes cheaper for them. They may want to buy more of the stuff that we make. But on the other side, the stuff that we're importing becomes more expensive, and we import a lot more than we export. We have a massive trade deficit, at least in goods, not so much in services. So this could possibly, the fall of the pound tends to be inflationary because everything that we import becomes more expensive. And you mentioned the Bank of England. They spoke, a bunch of Bank of England leaders, a whole cavalcade of Bank of England leaders were before the Treasury Select Committee yesterday. It was pretty clear that they don't quite know how to model this. Hugh Pill, who's the chief economist, was asked, is this inflationary, this new package? He said initially it will bring inflation down, but because people are paying less for energy, they have more disposable income, they may spend it, so that could be inflationary down the road.
I mean, essentially what you're saying, Laurie, and I want to put this to you, Albie, is this is a gamble, and this is a gamble that Liz Truss's reputation will now be judged by. And as Rishi Sunak, I'm sure, will be able to testify to, it's very easy when you're handing out the cash, when you're splashing the cash. It's much harder further down the line when you've got to try and balance the books.
Isabel, it is a gamble. The question for Liz Truss is it the right political gamble at the time that we're in? The Conservatives have been in power for the last 12 years, and I think we can all agree that things at the moment are not good. So what I think Liz Truss is banking on is that by changing track, she can say, well, I'm going to do things differently. The economists that I'm working with think austerity was wrong, as many of them have said. Gerard Lyons, Patrick Minford and Julian Jessops have all said that. She wants to change tack and see if that is going to keep the Conservatives in at the next election.
Kevin, is it something that will keep the Conservatives in at the next election? I mean, you're listening to this. I wonder, do you feel like me and you think... Sorry, can we see Kevin, please? Yeah. I wonder, do you think like me, Kevin, and you think you go out there, you earn your wages and you collect them at the end of the month and whatever it is, but all of this is beyond us. It's beyond mere mortal people. We're caught up in some sort of maelstrom, and goodness knows what way we're going to come out of this.
No, I think that's right. It's a political gamble. It's an economic gamble, but it's a gamble she has to take. Because people, through no fault of their own, are watching their living standards absolutely destroyed. So just people on low incomes who are really getting hammered, but people on middle incomes who are very comfortable in the past, could afford to go on holiday and so on, all of a sudden their disposable income is just being wiped out. And if she didn't take action, particularly when Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the SNP are all arguing for price freezes, she would have just been hammered and she'd be signing the death warrant of the Conservative Party at the next election. She clearly doesn't want to spend this money. In fact, she was dismissing energy support as handouts. Well, she's probably going to give the biggest handout in history now, because she has no alternative. Just sitting back.
An alternative, Kevin. She has an alternative. And I want to put this to Laurie, and I want your opinion, Kevin, as well, which is the moral responsibility on big industry. Does big industry have any moral conscience? If you're you're exploring, you're doing these oil explorations, and gas explorations, and you think, do you know, it's a bit embarrassing, the amount of money we're making. I know we like a few quid. We might like to make a bit of that. But this is just embarrassing. Do they not have, or should they, Kevin, have some sort of moral conscience where they say, do you know what, guys, we've got more than enough here. Have some of what's on our table.
Well, I believe they should, but often they don't, because they owe their primary legal responsibility to their shareholders, who are doing very, very well at it. We've seen it with BP, we've seen it with Shell, we've seen it with Centrica, the owner of British Gas, which reintroduced the dividend. It's why the government has to step in and represent everybody else, the ordinary people, the people of Britain. That is the only way to do it. I think she is making a mistake on not raising the windfall tax she's inherited from...
Well, let's go to our economist, Laurie, on this and see what her argument is for or against windfall taxes.
Well, we can only impose a windfall tax on oil and gas coming out of the ground in the UK. When we talk about BP and Shell, we can't tax them on stuff that they're getting out of other places.
Are we being fed the wrong picture because they're making this money out of Venezuela, for instance?
They're making money all over the place. And I think that windfall taxes now for these companies, they're a soft target. They probably should say, you know what, we're going to give up a little bit more voluntarily just for the optics. And in fact, the head of Norway's biggest oil company a couple of days ago came out and said, tax us more. It's absolutely fine. It's a good PR exercise. But these guys don't make money all the time. The oil companies lost a bundle in 2020 and 2021. I know.
Private pensioners in the UK, a lot of people's pensions tied up in the profits.
Look, I'm no apologist for big oil here, but these are long investment horizons. These are billions of pounds of investment. The investment cycle is long. So you've got to look over the whole investment cycle for these companies.
We've got to leave it there. Laurie Laird, Albie Amankona, and also to you, Kevin Maguire. I've got to say, it was loving your Guernica Picasso behind you there. I haven't seen that as your backdrop before.